And I had assumed for some reason that because I was an orthodontist, how hard could it be? But I had really bright people, good friends of mine now who were 10 or 15 years younger, looking at me saying, I'm going to have to show you the basics here.
Yeah.
And you keep your follow-up process. You don't mix stuff where it doesn't work, and if it doesn't work, someone won't be happy with you. It's expensive when experiments don't work. You can try stuff, but really there's a bit of a risk here, because why aren't you just using the way that works? Why are you doing it differently? And even when you do it differently, Finn, maybe you could be doing it a little bit better. And these are all kind of things that build into that process, I think. So I think the rigor of science, the rigor of engineering, that background can sort of help you, but also I think it didn't harm that I had some good people around me who wanted to see it work.
Hi everybody, and welcome back to the next episode of Tim Talks Ortho. Today I am sitting down with Dr. Geoghegan from the Specialist Orthodontist practice in Dublin. I actually have the pleasure of knowing Finn quite well. We spent quite a lot of time together over the years, haven't we?
Yeah, that's true.
So I know a lot about your history, but today I really want to sort of look at your global journey to where you are now, because your route hasn't been as linear as some other clinicians, right? Like you've sort of traveled, you are deep in the education space. You've also then tinkered with technology. So I think your story is a really unique and interesting one for people to sort of hear. But before we dive deep into those specific elements, do you kind of just want to give everybody a run through? Because there's Hong Kong, there's, Edinburgh, there's London.
Well, it's, I studied in Ireland, and after that I moved over here for a while, like a lot of Irish dentists, and we worked for a bit. And then I made the run over to live in Australia, but on the way I sort of had an idea that I wanted to become an orthodontist after thinking I wanted to do something else in Max Fac or something. And I fancied following, it was quite a well-worn path for Irish people and Irish dentists. You could come over to England, you worked in the NHS for a few years, and then you went to Australia, and then that was as far as it went, but that seemed enough. And I got a job working in a dental school in Australia, and at the same time I'd sort of made some inquiries to University of Hong Kong, because there was a couple of Irish professors there, and I just chanced, did they have an ortho program? Because I'd contacted all the programs in Oz, because I thought maybe I'd like to do ortho in Oz, and I knew I'd need some time to rejig, to make myself in a position perhaps more competitive to be a candidate to get into one of the programs. And I went to visit the program, and I met Urban Haig. He was the chair professor from Sweden, and I thought we were having a chat, and as his way, I ended up having like a day-long interview, and because I only sort of realized halfway through I interviewed quite well, I thought. And a few months later I got offered the gig, and Annika, my then girlfriend, now wife, said, well, we'll have to go with you then. And a friend of mine who was in the program in Australia, who knew me, said, well, it's a good program, you don't get offered many of them, I'd go. So I went, and I had 3 great years here. I had 2 super professors. It was one of those those little pivotal moments where you start to get experience and see things differently, and culturally. The program I liked. Everybody tends to speak very positively about the place they trained in, but for me, I really enjoyed it. And I got quite into the science behind things. Urban was very open door, very interested in how things happen, good sense of humour, and I decided I didn't want to go just full-time into practice, so I'd like to have a balance, and that's what I do today. I was interested in sort of biology and things like that, and I took a job in a position as a student in Guy's Hospital in King's College with Martin Coburn, and I stayed there and I worked in practice half the time. And then it got complicated because we started having children, and the bills started coming in, and I started to
Those children are expensive.
I had to make some decisions, and then it all spiraled from there. And then I ended up back in Ireland after I finished my PhD, and that was 10 years ago now. I think 9 years ago now. And I took over the practice 8 years ago, and we met around then, I think.
Yeah.
So that's where.
And do you think that whole journey to that point has changed how you look at things, sort of like clinically, and how you approach things? I know you're very technology led, so you're happy to try, test. I've been having conversations with Grant before and Hugh, and it's like there's a certain type of intrinsic confidence to move through that. But training and experiencing a global view, as you've said, do you think that you look at things very differently to, let's say, a traditional path, I should say, to orthodontics?
I'm not sure, but I was lucky to meet people who kind of make you sit up a bit and think. Yeah, I had a classmate Larry Lee. I think he's a member of TIO, and he's probably the reason I knew about TIO. And Larry was a super bright guy, worked really hard, very innovative. We used to go on little trips into China together, and he married a girl from my class, and I knew so I'd sort of a network of people who kind of I admired, and I sort of would listen to what they do, and I think that's what I do. I sort of have a network of people that who I see where they're going. I'm kind of curious why they do things, and I think that's probably led me where I am a little bit, and it comes probably from I've similar background, that kind of way of thinking.
Yeah. And I think that's one thing I want to sort of dive a little bit deeper in, because I remember, was it 2020? You were like, nope, I'm going to make my own aligners. I'm not doing this anymore. And you pretty much like snapped into that's what we're doing, and I'm going and I'm doing that. And I'm sure there was a whole journey and there was a whole learning. It wasn't just, but from the outside it looked like it was just a definitive decision and a move, and like I understand we've spoken about the commercials and all of that stuff that you've done on that, but talk me through.
You see me slightly wince there.
I
as you
did
said, just sort of a ST moment.
I did
like the sliding doors, you'd go back and say no. That it was I suppose it was a Hemingway who said, like, bankruptcy, it starts slowly then happens quickly, and it was a decision made where I thought it might be nice to be able to do this, and I went to visit some friends and I thought that's great, and I thought, well, that's a lot of work, isn't it? I might do this for some of my cases, like those cases who come back where there's been a bit of relapse and mum's pretty upset because she's after spending a lot of money on treatment, and you and I and everybody in the room knows they haven't been worn well, but the fact remains the teeth aren't straight.
Yeah.
So that came and that worked, and like a lot of things, if it works and you've had a positive experience, it does kink or influence that journey, and you sort of inclined to, oh, that went okay, let's keep on going. Yeah. And that was definitely one of those things. It did help that my father was in process engineering my whole life, and I was used to growing up in that business environment. My mum's family ran sort of restaurant. I'm used to kind of that environment a little bit, so it didn't seem all that unusual, although the opinion from some of my colleagues was that it was unusual in orthodontics. But if you come from a background like that, it isn't that foreign, and a lot of people do come from small businesses and would be used to that idea, and then making that, well, why don't we do it, or why don't we change it, so it wasn't totally foreign to me.
And did you ever doubt the decision?
Oh yeah, probably doubting it now. Well, you have people, not a lot of people who do it.
No.
You know what I mean? So you could sort of say maybe that's the reason why I doubt doing it. It did take a lot of work, and it was a lot of piecing things together. It was clear that whilst I had observed a lot of engineering and engineering processes growing up, I was clearly not an engineer. I was an orthodontist playing at what I thought an engineer would do when they wanted to make their own aligners. But at this point, I had a good network of really sound, thorough people, and I could ring them or I could ask for help, and that kind of got me through. And they would do more than I would ask of them to get it where it needed to be. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I also became a bit more savvy of the business side of it and how that was working, and how to make a case. Was this just an ego trip where I could go around and give a talk like so many people who make... There was a phrase once said to me by a guy I worked with called Steve Kneebone, who was a very interesting guy who had a whole bunch of practices in the southwest of England when I was here doing my PhD, and it's the saw one, made one, wrote the book. Where you go on a talk and you sort of put up your hand after and say, how many of these have you done actually? And that was the kind of the bit at the same time that I'd learned through the science process. Very much process. When you were performing an experiment, I'd gone back as a fully fledged orthodontist into a really good science lab here in London, where I was atrocious. I was a terrible, and I had assumed for some reason that because I was an orthodontist, this would be, how hard could it be? But I had really bright people, good friends of mine now who were 10 or 15 years younger, looking at me saying, I'm going to have to show you the basics here.
Yeah.
And you keep you follow a process. You don't mix stuff or it doesn't work. And if it doesn't work, someone won't be happy with you. And it's expensive when experiments don't work. You can try stuff, but really there's a bit of a risk here, because why aren't you just using the way that works? Why are you doing it differently? And even when you do it differently, Finn, maybe you could be doing it a little bit better.
Yeah.
And these are all kind of things that build into that process, I think. So I think the rigor of science, the rigor of engineering, that background can sort of help you. But also I think it didn't harm that I had some good people around me who wanted to see it work. They were kind of supportive.
Yeah.
And so you could reference those people.
And honestly, you're going to hate this question. A lot of orthodontists look at that lab fee and it just kills their soul, right? It's also convenience that they're paying to a certain extent because you're running another business and another fit out, right?
Yeah.
Like, do the commercials stack up? Like, now on knowing what you know, obviously there's been iteration, refinement and those sorts of things, but does that for your practice, and every practice is different, right? But does that commercially make sense for you?
It does. And it's not just because we make them ourselves. It's because we make them ourselves and we run everything through remote monitoring via the clinic.
Yeah.
So as we've become more proficient and as a team have become a bit more experienced and we put through a lot of training with our staff, we have a really good team now. The process incrementally improves, not just looking at replacing third-party aligners with what you make. It actually becomes, the process completely changes. And actually the process we run is the bit that I feel proud about.
Yeah.
Not that I can suck down, make the aligners. I don't think that's that hard actually. And I'd be happy to explain that to people, that the process of making an aligner isn't technically very difficult at all. My father said to me one day, he said, "What's all the fuss about with this stuff?" Because I had the process, I had the lab in one of his units once, and we got a lot of people to visit, and he came in to me bewildered one day. He says, "What's all the fuss about?" He says, "I've had a look, there's always people come to see your aligners," and he said, "There's 6 processes in this building and yours is by far the least technical and the most wasteful, as I can see. Why is that interesting?" And I had to explain it, but actually when he made comments like that, you're like, maybe there's some improving there.
Yeah.
So to us it was the integration of what we learned by bringing in aligners, knowing who to treat with aligners, knowing how to treat them, how to direct them, how to make sure they're staying on board. That dental monitoring or the remote monitoring process we're using was actually enhancing that process. And that feeds back directly to types of aligners, numbers of aligners, processing it. So it's not one for another. It's a complete change of process to the one I used when I had a third-party aligner system. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think this I'll cast back to a conversation we had years ago, which is like, I hope you don't mind me saying, but it was in terms of you hit this crossroad of what is growth? Is it depth in my current business, or is it actually scaling at the same rates of return on a bigger physical scale? Additional practice or build depth in the existing practice. Talk me through your process, because you ultimately chose...
My process where you told me what to do, and it was the right thing to do.
No, you went and did it though, right?
So yeah, I suppose I hit a juncture where I was thinking about what's this? Where am I going with all this? And there was an opportunity maybe to expand into a different location, and we decided against it. Not just because you told me not to do it, but because it's exactly what you said, is to build depth and focus and not to be diluted at the stage I was at with being somewhere else. Yeah. And I think that was a really super thing for me, because in a strange way, with those processes that I've mentioned before, I would arguably still have the same capacity to grow in my practice now that I thought I had at the time when we chatted. Does that make sense?
100%.
Yeah.
Smarter, not harder. Better systems, better protocol.
Yeah.
Without impacting every other bit of the load.
And when you mentioned at the beginning, and I always sort of take a little step back a little bit, when you talk about tech, I wouldn't consider myself interested in tech per se. It's when I've seen the impact it's had on the workflow I learned in dental school and orthodontic practice, and I've seen that you can't help but turn and sort of, that has to be part of how you look at your practice, and that's the bit that draws you. And when you see the change, certain things that don't exist in your life anymore for a better way, that's when you become more tech orientated. It's not an option per se, what I mean? It's not a kind of thing you choose to be into or not.
Yeah. And do you think that has shaped also a shift in what you define as success, right? Because a lot of people are like, what, back in the day it was how many practices, how many chairs, how many head count, how many this, how many that. Like, I'm almost like, that's all superficial stuff now when you're talking depth, right? Like, do you want to talk surface or you want to talk depth? Like, do you think your perception of success has shifted and evolved over time, having gone through that journey?
Yeah, I think the idea, I saw it first, this idea, that phrase patient journey was newish to me. And when you don't know what that entails, really, it can sound a little bit light. But making that transition from how you would treat the teeth from your perspective to how the patient has experienced the whole process, whilst you still doing what you need to do, that has been a bit of a change. And the definitions of success aren't just measured by sort of simple KPIs, but I think with the technology and with the sort of changes we witnessed, you sort of have a slightly different vision in mind for the future, which pushes you forward, which you think, that's what I'd like for my patients. How do I get there?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sort of talking about leadership and culture, because I love when I walk into your practice, right? Like, you inherited a team when you bought it, but you've also rebuilt and brought in other people, and every practice.
And we have the
goes
dog.
through. Yes, most important team member. But I love when I walk into your practice and I see those kitchen cupboards that you have written all over, right? Like, how I love that approach. I genuinely do. Do you want to just explain that?
Well, you know
really
that scene
briefly?
in the movie The Shining with Jack Nicholson, when all work and no play makes Jack a dull boy? That's how I feel it looks to people. Yeah. So I wanted to have a lab, and I didn't have an awful lot of money for a lab. So we decided I would get a white IKEA kitchen that looked a bit like a lab. And that worked fine. And after a while, I was having difficulty sort of putting together what needed to be done and who and everything. So we started using the white surfaces as sort of whiteboards.
Yeah.
And it sort of took off a little bit. So when I'm upstairs having a cup of coffee in the middle, I can sort of see where we are with things and what's supposed to be done and what's in a way, and possibly, I don't know, is it an age or generational thing? That I can't do on a screen. I can't replicate that in a screen. Whereas if I'm forced to confront it whilst drinking my cup of tea,
I think it's the mind mapping too, right? Because it's the patterns and the colours and these sorts of things. And you're like, okay, well, that's there, then that's there. You're almost as if you could take it out of the physical screen and put it up there and move it around.
Well, my staff are very tolerant of it now.
They don't just come in and wipe it off.
No, and they kind of see that, when I'm up sort of writing things down and changing it. But it does help me understand that the process, what we do, involves them hugely, and keeping them with us and developing their skills and making sure they're happy and that I can push them a little bit. And in a way, I sort of see parallels as my children are getting older through their sporting career, how you do the same without coming on too heavy, or how you don't, and it's trial and error. And you can try you can learn in the same sort of way, but I think the leadership bit is something that isn't, maybe certain people are more cut out for it than others, but I think it is learning, trying to when you get it wrong, you have to, I got it wrong, and turn around and I got it wrong. But when you get it right, you sort of don't, you sort of say, we kind of.
Yeah, you have to share it. It's a lonely place, isn't it? Yeah. When you win, it's theirs. When you lose, it's yours. Like, that's kind of the unwritten.
But that can help insofar as sometimes I explain to people little parts of the journey when they get lost because someone hasn't dotted the I or crossed the T. That will be me who will have to resolve that problem at the end. And that's why I need them to do that, cross that T and dot that I at the time. And they start to see it as more joined up. And that's why those little things where I feel like, I know this sounds a little bit small, but it is quite important we do it consistently. And with all of those systems and the training, the delegation bit is hard for us because I'm not sure what my colleagues think, but we weren't really trained to work in a team like that. And that must be, for younger people coming through, for our staff members, is that like the first place where we were asked to work in a team was when we owned our own business.
I was having that conversation with Andrew in another one where it's like you are trained, but you're only 50% equipped. Do you know? Because that whole other piece, there's no roadmap, there's no training, there's no early.
And we have those competencies to do that thing ourselves, but in this newer sort of iteration of orthodontic practice where we work in a team. We have to, and I found sort of being part of this group to be a great way to learn some of those kind of like, how to tune the team or how to improve things or how to go through and to look at someone who's in your group and say, is it just me? And everybody says, no, we all have this and that. There's great sort of release in that to know, okay, well, has anyone got a solution? And if they have, it builds you up that you're sort of not quite on your own, which in practice you are a lot. And I think a lot of our clinic, we trained in a hospital clinic, we specialised in a hospital clinic, and for a lot of us in practice, we're on our own, and a lot of us may not be with another orthodontist. So we are quite siloed. And I think this collective thing, this network, this group thing is hugely important to us, and not just to learn little techniques, but just to be able to meet someone who is in the same
boat.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it.
Perfect. That's all we've got time for today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you
Tim.
so much
Pleasure.
for joining me. Always a pleasure. I'm sure we'll.
I hope I don't look like I'm just straight off the plane and off the tube and straight in under the spotlight here.
You look absolutely fine. Don't
Thanks
worry.
a million.
So that's all we've got time for today, but do make sure that you subscribe and listen. We do drop a new episode every month with orthodontists from all around the world, some of our partners in the appliance companies, but talking about all things orthodontics. Thank you.